Welcome back to part 2 of the Ba'omar Order. In part 1 we learned their history, why they came to Tatooine, and how their brains ended up in a jar attached to a BT-16 Spider Droid. We pointed out how crazy it was that they started off as ascetic monks, and ended up being surrounded by all the debauchery that describes Jabba's palace. This unlikely commingling of enlightened monks with depraved weirdos and criminals actually worked both ways, as some of the thugs gave up their life of crime, whereas some of the monks started to become criminals themselves. This even affected the enlightened brains, who were apparently bored of thinking about the universe so much, and would just eavesdrop on people's conversations. This was invaluable information to Jabba the Hutt, and so it said that he would keep them on his payroll, though it's not exactly clear what you pay to a brain that lives in a jar. Some of the monks who still had their bodies were also corrupted by Jabba's influence, and the most notorious was a monk named Grimpen. Grimpen had used his knowledge of removing someone's brain, and used this as a way to torture some of Jabba's victims, placing them in the BT-16 Spider Droid, but without the years of meditation that are required to prepare one for leaving their body. People in this state would enter into a rare form of psychosis, where they would be mentally screaming for days on end, having no physical requirements to sleep, or any other thing to distract you from your terrible fate. After Jabba's death, there were a ton of thieves that tried to break into Jabba's palace and plunder whatever they could find. The only problem was that the Ba'omar still considered it to be their temple, and when these thieves came in and started to rip up the place, the monks were tired of opening their doors up to strangers, and they overpowered these thieves and forced them to go through enlightenment. These unprepared brains were shoved into a jar, being kept alive on a shelf to suffer for millennia. The Ba'omar monks started to go a little bit crazy after this event, and they realized that they could lure in even more thieves by intentionally sending out unarmed monks with a whole bunch of valuables from the palace, just so they could be captured by some thugs, and tell them that he found all these valuables at the old unguarded Jabba's palace. This tactic brought in tons of fresh bodies that were later disposed of outside of the temple, all of them without their brains. Well, that's it for the Ba'omar monks and the BT-16 Spider Droid, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. One of the first victims of the monks' forced enlightenment was Bib Fortuna. He returned to the palace after Jabba's death, and was able to fight off a group of thieves, only to realize he was surrounded by menacing monks. They overpowered him, cut out his brain, but instead of leaving it on a shelf, hooked him up to his own BT-16 Spider Droid. It is unknown if his droid needed special controls which read the firing of neurons, or if Bib Fortuna actually had some telepathic skills with which to control his droid. Tatooine wasn't the only site of a Ba'omar monastery, as there was a massive complex on Teth, and one on the planet Danuta. There was some dissent amongst the early Ba'omar order, with one of these monks breaking off to form the most perfect order of Kavin. Kavin was force sensitive, and he was able to convince other Ba'omar to worship him as their perfect leader. The only way you can tell members of the Kavin faith from that of the Ba'omar order is that the Kavin used green nutrient fluid, whereas the Ba'omar used red. Han Solo actually had a long conversation with the BT-16 Spider Droid while he was in capture in Jabba's palace after being liberated from Carbonite. This Ba'omar was named Saida, and he saw himself as a Ba'omar historian. He wasn't really interested with the whole contemplating the infinite kind of stuff, but he did like that putting his brain in a jar meant that he could devote hundreds of years to studying everything he wanted. He loved history, and he couldn't pass up the opportunity to interview Han Solo, a man who had become famous for his fight against the Empire. He promised that he could keep Leia Organa safe if the scruffy-looking nerf herder would tell him his entire life story. Han inadvertently made Saida rethink his life, and he started to become less focused on learning, and for the first time considered things like bravery, humor, and friendship. And remember this guy? His name's Tesak, and he was Jabba's accountant. After Jabba died, and the Ba'omar order started to go a little nutty, they forced Tesak to undergo the brain jar surgery, though it's said that Tesak actually enjoyed his new life as a brainwalker. The design for the Ba'omar monks came from early sketches from Ralph McQuarrie when he was making concept art for the Return of the Jedi, and we never actually got a name for these things until the book The Illustrated Star Wars Universe was released. Well, that's it for the Ba'omar monks and the BT-16 Spider Droid. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and be sure to leave a comment down below if I missed any cool facts, or if you have a suggestion for future videos. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at MetaNerdsLore, so you can see us build Star Wars props and cosplays, along with some other cool Star Wars stuff. If you want to help support this channel, check out the description below for our Amazon store and our Patreon. And be sure to subscribe, because we're making videos like this every single day. But more important than all that, remember, if you ever get to the point where you think you're going to put your head in a jar and attach that jar to a walking spider, it's time to go outside and meet some people, and the Force will be with you. Always.